Welcome back to the Deep Dig A Sports Pod. I'm your host, D, and today we are going to be talking about the highly anticipated Week 7 that actually delivered in college football. But before we dig into that, be sure to hit that like button, be sure to subscribe, drop some comments below, let me know your thoughts because we're going to dig into a whole lot today. And I say we dive straight into it, which was the game of the week. Ended up being Ohio State 31. Oregon 32 in a shootout. This was the number 2 going against the number 3 team in the nation, and the hype delivered just in the first half alone. We seen an interception that wasn't an interception. We saw a fumble. We saw a missed field goal, a muffed extra point snap. We saw a guy in Holden spit on another player of the opposing team and get kicked out of the game. It was a crazy, and that was just in the first half. So this Ohio State Oregon game was absolutely bananas, something that you just have to get hyped over. And man, like what a game. And I think it came down to ultimately it came down to the two quarterbacks. And I think before this, we had talked last week, like, okay, do we 100% trust Dillon Gabriel? I think it should have went both ways. And do we 100% trust Will Howard? Because we have not seen him on this stage before. And he has, he doesn't have the past that Dillon Gabriel has. Dillon Gabriel at least led his team prior to this to a huge win last year in the Red River now rivalry game as he led Oklahoma over Texas. So we have that in our bag. Will Howard hasn't had this big of a stage in this big of a moment and this big of a showing. And that was the thing that kind of that let Ohio State down the stretch. It comes down to Will Howard, it comes down to Ryan Day and those two things. And I mean, at the end of the day, it was a hell of a game. And you felt it. Like you felt the atmosphere in Eugene. You felt the crowd get into it. You felt that from the Oregon Duck side and Dan Lanning, you felt like this team was prepared and ready to do anything to win this game. It was intense. And I mean, even the commercials. The one thing that I thought really set the tone was like after the first drive. I don't know if you guys had seen this, but on the broadcast they had the this Oregon Ducks commercial. And it was the Modern Family guy, Ty Burrell, and he's talking over like a groundskeeper keeping the ground and talking about how the Big Ten has all this tradition and they're honored to be there. And then all of a sudden you hear this like, and this motorcycle comes and it's the Oregon Duck riding a motorcycle and he burns a couple wheelies and draws the O for Oregon and heads out of there. And I'm like, damn, Oregon came to play. Like Oregon's not from marketing all the way to the team and on the field. They stepped up. And again, that first drive, they had an interception. It was not called in on the field, and they did not stop to review it. But it was an interception, and everybody knew it. And so you kind of see the Oregon, Ohio State took advantage of that, ended up scoring on that, and really shut the crowd down. But this team really battled back. They came back and they got the crowd back into it, and it was just a dogfight from there on out. We seen Oregon's defense was way tougher than most people expected. I did not expect them to get as many opportunities and turnovers as they did. We seen it from both the defense and the special teams. That onside kick was crazy to come out there and just rocket one straight at one of the receivers was crazy, but it ended up working out. And it was things like that that separate what happens when you win and what happens when you lose. Because again, Oregon was down points. Oregon missed a field goal and they missed an extra point. So that is 4-point swing right there. And if you account for the interception that wasn't an interception, that could have been who knows what happens on that drive. That's points taken away from Ohio State, which Ohio State did the right thing and ended up scoring on that drive when they needed to and really setting the tone for the rest of the game. But man, Oregon came to play. Dillon Gabriel came to play. He just made the right throws at the right time and he did not shy away from the spotlight. It was a good game. One thing they're going to have to shore up is making sure that they do not kill themselves with stupid penalties once they get hyped, because we see that just Dan Lanning is naturally that type of guy to get hyped, to push other guys and be like, yeah, let's go. He is a hype coach. gonna have to rein that in if we're gonna be honest moving forward because you see it with Holden spitting on the Ohio State corner. You can't let things like that happen. You can't let your emotions get the best of you, and it starts at the top. And we'll talk about that a little bit later on in this show with Kirby fucking Smart in Georgia. But anyways, I really liked this Oregon Ducks team. I liked what they were doing. I kind of felt like this was a huge upset moment for Ohio State coming into it, just because one, Ohio State hadn't played anybody, and I think that really goes a long way for scheduling. Is if you're playing turkey, tomato can after tomato can after tomato can, turkey after turkey after turkey, you can't be ready when you're in these type of games. And Oregon, we seen they had gotten tested early on. They went to, or they had Boise State come, and Boise State punched them in the mouth. They took them to overtime. And I think as collectively, as you move throughout the rest of this season, you take moments like that, like, okay, well, we were down. We came back against Boise. We won it in overtime. That's a now in the vault for this specific team, and that's something that goes a long way. And Ohio State doesn't have that. They were just blowing by people. And I just don't think they had it in their reservoir. If they had had a good game on their matchup that they had struggled on early, what they probably shouldn't have struggled in, it would have been a lot different, I think. But ultimately, again, it came down to Will Howard. It came down to Dillon Gabriel. And we'll talk about the last sequence of events. I know they're saying that Dan Lanning did it on purpose. I'm going to go ahead and call bullshit. I don't think that they put the 12th man out there on purpose. If I'm going to be completely honest, I think it was just a happy accident. And, but from the other side, from Ryan Day and Will Howard, you have to recognize that. You have to recognize what is going on. You have to recognize that I don't know how they killed so much. They were so lackadaisical with their horrible time management. And then Will Howard at the end, you fucked up, dude. I mean, it happens to everybody, but for you on this stage, it cannot happen. You cannot lose sight of where you're at. It had to be one, two, three, find a guy or throw it away. You cannot scramble for that yardage no matter what. Like, you just got to give yourself another down, another chance to get after it. But you can't do what you did. You held it way too long, and then you scrambled when you shouldn't have scrambled. That sucks, and that's going to be the difference between winning and losing when it comes to these top five teams. But I mean, realistically, Ohio State, I think, has bigger problems. And one of their things, they were supposed to have an awesome defense. That defense just did not show up on Saturday. It was one of their number one corner, Burke, got burnt. They were picking on him the entire game. He was just getting burned after burnt, dude. It was insane. So and their pass rush was just not there. At certain points, it was just like Dillon Gabriel was doing whatever he wanted back there and finding open guys. And you failed at all three levels on your defense. I think there's something needs to change on that defensive side of the ball, because you have basically an all-star team back there. You got to get it figured out. I don't know what happened, but you should be let down. You should feel degraded on this. And it starts with coaching. You got to figure out what's going on. You got to get to the core of it. Ryan Day, I'm pretty sure to like Monday is going after it and getting into these guys' ass and figuring out who's going to actually be a starter for me moving forward. I mean, man, ultimately, like, you just got let down on that end. You got let down at the quarterback. Even your two guys, I mean, they call thunder and thunder, lightning and lightning. Quinyon Junkins fumbles the ball in like the second possession. You can't have things like that happen. I mean, that's the difference between winning and losing at this level, and you lost the game. But you move forward. You're still in a pretty good spot now. I'm pretty sure they're still going to be highly ranked in the top like 10 to 15. If I'd be very surprised if they fall below 10, I'm going to be completely honest. You have a real chance again with this Big 10 to make moves still. You still have a pretty strong enough schedule to prove that you are a powerhouse team in this league. So continue to move on if you're Ohio State, but if you're Oregon, you're feeling great about this. This moves you probably up to number 2. Yeah, this moves you probably up to number 2. I don't see any reason why they wouldn't be. And you got to be feeling great. Dan Lanning, you're like, okay, finally I got this staple win. Now let's continue to move forward. On to the next one, boys. Let's go ahead and get after it. You can't have a letdown like we seen a couple weeks ago when Bama beat Georgia, and all of a sudden everyone's punching their ticket to the playoffs, and everyone's like, "Oh, uh, what's Jalen Milroe? He's the Heisman favorite," and blah blah blah. You can't let all this talk get to your head. You got to get back in the lab. You got to get after it. Don't get content with just a big regular season win. Continue to stack these up, and you're going to be fine. All right, now let's move over to the Red River Rivalry game. Texas taking on Oklahoma. And this was a kind of a weird game to start off with, but ultimately Texas finds their groove and they get after it and they do what good teams do and they boat race a shittier team. And I mean, I going into it, I was highly thinking that if Oklahoma's going to do anything with this season, it needs to be now. It needs to be this game. And the SEC is wide open. Pretty much everyone but Texas has a loss on their record. If you could be the team to knock them down a peg, that puts you right in the driver's spot and you control your destiny moving forward. And I was thinking, holy shit, it's happening because Quinn Ewers did not find his footing in this game until about a quarter and a half deep. He comes out, they end up saying, Sarkisian's like, yo, we want the ball. And it's like, oh, okay. What is Texas gonna do? How is Texas gonna really hold up? Or are they gonna make a statement here? The statement was they were just trying to get Quinn Ewers a little bit out of that rusty spot that he was in. And it didn't really work for the first quarter. I mean, he comes out the first possession, throws a pick, and I'm like, oh, uh, I could be looking like a genius here. Oklahoma, I didn't say Oklahoma was going to win it, but man, they could have a really good showing. And ultimately, like offensively, Oklahoma, what are you doing? Why is Hawkins can't throw the ball? Why is Hawkins starting for you? I know Jackson Arnold had a bad showing against Tennessee where you had to pull him at half. I think he had 3 picks in that first half alone. But you cannot keep rolling out Hawkins. At some point, it's just going to get tired and it's going to get old. I know that he's mobile. I know that he could run, but there's a reason that you recruited this 5-star and why he was a mega recruit to begin with. I guarantee you, if Jackson Arnold moves on to another team, Jackson Arnold will be a viable starting quarterback. But I just don't know what Oklahoma's identity is going to be. And I don't think Oklahoma knows what their identity is offensively. It's kind of bullshit. And so to keep in Hawkins in that spot when you needed a guy to get scores and move the ball, it just didn't make sense. And Texas ended up figuring that out. And they're like, okay, we can play our game. We can do whatever we can want to do on the offensive side of the ball. And we know that defensively, we're going to be staunch because these guys can't throw. We don't have to worry about the throw. We could just defend the run. We can make sure that we spy the quarterback, and we're going to be fine. And down the stretch, you've seen it, and they get boat raced. And so that's bad on Oklahoma. I think they should have made the switch to Jackson Arnold. I seen that he was warming up in that at the end of the second quarter. I just would have pulled the trigger. And I think what ultimately did it was what at the end of the half when the sideline reporter was coming off and asked, hey, in the next half, are you going to start Jackson Arnold? And it was almost like the coach was like, like, why are you asking me that? Like, it was almost like he was offended that they were saying make the switch. So I think he got a little bit headstrong and said no and kept rolling with Hawkins the whole time. So it's pretty ridiculous. I think there was a chance there at the beginning if you take advantage of it, but ultimately they didn't. And Texas keeps rolling. And I think this sets up a really good game against Georgia moving forward. And I mean, Georgia has their own problems. And I don't know how good this Georgia team actually is. I mean, they could be great, but I think that they have a core problem, and that core problem is the culture of Georgia. Another student has been arrested from Georgia, and this time the accusations are pretty vile. And if they come out and that it's not like it is, if it's not proven and he's not guilty, great. But I mean, it's just one after another with Georgia. And we kind of seen on the field why it was. And it all starts at the top. It starts with coaching. Georgia beats Mississippi State, but on the sidelines, the Mississippi State quarterback rushes out for a few yard gain, hits the sideline. Kirby Smart comes out of nowhere and pushes him. And I think that's just type of bullshit that realistically you know where it starts with this, and it starts with Kirby Smart acting like nothing could happen to him, instilling that into his players, and then those players going out and wreaking fucking havoc on the town moving forward. And I think it's bullshit, and I think it needs to stop. And but the only way it is going to stop is if they start losing games. If we're going to be completely honest, that's the only way it stops in Georgia. And that's the only way Kirby Smart sees any repercussions is if he stops being a really good coach. So he can be a piece of shit guy, but if he's going to keep winning games, they're going to look the other way, and they're going to continue to look other way with these players, and it's stupid. And so that's my little rant on that. Ooh, another game that went down to the wire. Penn State travels to LA and takes on USC and ends up winning it in overtime 33-30. And this was one hell of a game. And this one was, I think it was a show, like it was a kitchen sink game for Lincoln Riley. And I think that he knew his playoff future this year was on the line. And I think that he knew that if he were to lose this game, the rumblings would start. They're not paying him all of that money. They did not give him a house. They did not buy his other house for him to miss the playoffs out of a 12-team playoff. They did not pay him to be 3-3, 1-3 in the Big Ten. They did not pay him to do this. So I think that I, I just don't know what you do if you're Lincoln Riley now, because your defense did step up. Ultimately, what cost you the game was the offense was on the offensive side. You were almost within field goal range. You had pretty much a good amount of time. You had timeouts. You could have made it work, but Miller Moss, Miller Moss overthrows his guy, and it's an easy pick for Penn State. And instead of it being an easy completion, it's an interception. Penn State takes it to OT, where then your offense sputters out again if you're USC. You do not get anything going. You try to kick the field goal, but you're kicking into the sun, which again, you chose to because that's where the student section is. But realistically, I was like, is that the right move? Because you're kicking it directly into the sun if you were to need a field goal. And I was like, okay, but maybe like Lincoln Riley's thinking, well, we don't need a field goal. What we're going to do is we're going to pound it and we're going to make sure that we actually get into that end zone. Like it's end zone and die for us. And ultimately, you needed the kick. You're kicking it right into the sun. Your kicker misses it. Penn State gets it a little bit closer, kicks the field goal, puts you away, sends you home. Goodbye. And there goes your playoff hopes. And so it was a weird game, but I mean, ultimately, you got to feel good if you're Penn State. Drew Aller had like 3 picks in this game, and I know he had 3 picks in his entire career, but I liked it. I liked the game that he had. I think that Drew Aller's really good. And ultimately, I think that him being able to overcome down as many scores as he was and with as many picks as he threw down the stretch, I think that shows that Drew Aller has resilience and that he can continue to fight on moving forward. And ultimately, that's what he's going to need. He's going to need those type of experiences, and that I think that goes up a million miles for him when he is going to go up against Ohio State, when he is going to go up against now Michigan, the Oregons of the world. I think that Drew Aller is a really, really good quarterback. And I think that this performance is only going to get him better. And I know that they were talking about prior to the game, okay, do you remember all 3 picks that you've thrown in your career? And he can name the down and distance. He can name the team, what day it was, all this bullshit. This is going to be a game that he's going to look back on and be like, I became a better quarterback because of that game. And it was a big one, and one that I was like a little hesitant. I did not know if they were going to be able to pull it off, but they did. And good on Drew Aller and good on Penn State. And I think this is a huge monkey off of James Franklin's back as well, because he was hearing the same shit that Lincoln Riley was hearing, which is you can't win a big game. We don't believe in you. If you lose this game, there might be chirpings in the background of who can we get to actually get us over this hump. And I think Lincoln Riley is hearing that now. James Franklin stays that off and proves that he is a good coach. It's again, loving this college season. And the other overtime thriller was Ole Miss going to Death Valley and taking on LSU. And this was a game where LSU had no fear coming into it. I think that They are very familiar with Ole Miss. They know what they've done in the past and historically in the past few years. They've been fine against Ole Miss. I don't think they are afraid of Lane. I don't think they're afraid of Jackson Dart. And they came out and they were showing it. And it was it was a pretty evenly matched game in that first quarter. Nussmeier ends up throwing a pick, but I mean, you felt pretty good if you're LSU. And down the stretch, the longer that they kind of stayed in it and stuck around, the more and more and more confidence they had. And you start to see the pass rush get after Jackson Dart. He feels uncomfortable in the pocket. He's throwing dumbass throws. He threw it, his pick, he threw it into triple coverage in the end zone. That was stupid. And so you start to see like it affects and the moment and the crowd start to get under the this team in Ole Miss, and you start to see Lane getting frustrated. They asked him after he went for it on fourth and did not make it, "Are you going to go for it on fourth down again?" He just no, and walks off. And so you start to see him get frustrated down the stretch, and I, I like this LSU team. I do not like Brian Kelly. If there was a way that LSU Tigers, this specific team with Nussmeier, with Kyron, with all these guys to win and Brian Kelly still get fired at the end of the year, I would be all for it. But that's not a reality, realistically. If they're going to continue to win, if they're going to continue to pull off these big games, he's going to be there. He's going to be there and he's going to get credit, which he's due for. But this team, something just switched in them and they were able to fight and they were able to battle and they were able to bring it to an overtime where they were pretty locked down and they go out there and they hold Ole Miss, who had been putting up 70, who had been just putting up realistically, they were the same as Oregon, or not Oregon, as Ohio State, where they didn't play anybody until they got punched in the mouth by of all teams, Kentucky, who just lost to Vanderbilt, which will Vanderbilt's actually a pretty good team. We know that, but Vanderbilt was 14-point dogs in that one. They go out there and beat Kentucky again. Kudos to them. Diego Pavia, that's the guy. Anyways, so they go out there and they get their teeth smashed in by Kentucky. And it's like, okay, how do we bounce back? They go out and play a subpar South Carolina team. And it's like, okay, are we back on track? But realistically, all of those things that Kentucky showed still showed up in this LSU game. The pass rush got after him. Jackson Dart felt uncomfortable and lackadaisical at some points and just felt like his arm talent. It felt like a guy who realistically he thought that his talent was going to overcome this team, but this Tigers team, they are pretty good and they will get after it and they are not afraid of you, and that showed on the field on Saturday and it was awesome to see. And they were they held you to a field goal in overtime and they go out on the first play in OT and get a touchdown. It was awesome to see. I'm really glad that this took place in Death Valley. I think it was fit for it. And obviously, it had a really big effect on Ole Miss and that team itself. And so, kudos to the Tigers. Everything that I said about Oklahoma last week, where why not us mentality. If we can get this win, this puts us squarely in the driver's seat when it comes to the SEC title picture. And that's exactly what LSU did. And they had that mentality rather than Oklahoma did, and they go out there and they put it to the test and they put themselves squarely in this driver's seat. And now it's like, I don't know who to give it to because Alabama struggled. Georgia, I don't know how good they actually are. Tennessee struggled, which we'll talk about right now in a second. And so Texas is the big dog, of course, but can you put yourself in that second or third spot in the SEC? I believe this LSU Tigers team can. And so that's really cool to see. And it's cool to see them knock off this Ole Miss team that obviously was pretenders from the get go. And now we will start to hear the buzz about Lane going to Florida or Lane taking this job, because I think this year kind of showed that's kind of where they're going to top out at. I think that this Ole Miss team was either going to be boom or bust for Lane. And I just think that's kind of where they're going to be. They're going to be the Miami Dolphins of college football, where they're going to beat up on bad teams. They're going to run up the score on them. But as soon as they get a just opponent, someone that is equal or even better than them, they're going to fold under the pressure. And that's just what Lane Johnson is, or not Lane Johnson, Lane Kiffin is, and what Lane Kiffin coaches. And I think, again, another thing that we see is the bullshit, fake injuries. And again, they called it out on the broadcast. And so that's just the type of coach he is. And I know he's unapologetic about it. If it's going to help his team, he's going to do whatever. He's going to ask them to have holds and do penalties because you can't call it on every play. But that's ticky tack and that's kind of bullshit. And so we see how far that type of mentality gets you. And obviously, it's not big games. It's not big game worthy. And so kudos to LSU. Ole Miss, go back to the drawing board. Lane Kiffin, will you be here again or will you be coaching Florida next year? We'll see. Speaking of Florida, the Florida Gators actually took it to this Tennessee team. I mean, they took it all the way to overtime. This was a surprise, and I think it makes us like have a second look at what this Tennessee team actually is and how good they actually are. Because I know they came out of the gates really hot, and everyone was crowning Nico as the next guy up, as the next quarterback in college football. But I think we see that he's just not there at that point. And this Tennessee team, we saw it a little bit, which was kind of weird in that Oklahoma game. It felt like they took their foot off the gas without actually taking the foot off the gas. There was something a little bit wonky, something a little bit weird, just didn't really look right in that second half. And they just didn't really put up the points that they were supposed to. I mean, look at Texas. When Texas, you know, saw blood in the water, they attacked. When Tennessee saw it, like they saw they couldn't move anything, they just didn't put up the points. It was crazy. And so you saw that and it made you like a little bit weary, but you're like, you know what? It's a weird game. It's just something, just a blip on the radar, but they got the win. Let's keep moving forward. And then they struggle, they lose. Now you're looking at it and like, this is a dog shit Florida team. This is a Florida team that got absolutely embarrassed by Miami, that got embarrassed by Texas A&M. And so if you're another good team, you should go out there and embarrass them. And that just didn't happen. It just didn't. And I mean, I just don't know what you're going to do if you're Tennessee and you're looking at the rest of your schedule and you're like, how are we going to get wins? And I know it's weird. I know it's something that you can't judge teams in the SEC on a week to week basis because anyone could be a contender. But Florida has a track record. Words out on Florida. Florida's a fucking bad team. You should have beat them easily. And you didn't. You struggled. You had to take them. You had to beat them in overtime. And realistically, it shouldn't even have went to overtime. Florida was lined up to go for 2. You take a timeout. Florida comes back and kicks the extra point to send it to overtime rather than to just go for 2. I mean, realistically, if you're Napier, I see what you're trying to do. You're trying to save your job. You're trying to, okay, let's just kick. Let's get a for sure thing in overtime. But realistically, your team fucking sucks. You're already going to get fired. Why not just go for 2 and either win or lose by your offense? And your offense had been awesome the whole game. They looked good. They looked like they could get you a few yards. I think you should have just went for it. DJ Lagway, which I think there's going to be a bidding war for DJ Lagway this offseason. He looks awesome. I don't know why they're doing a disservice to both Graham Mertz and DJ Lagway, playing them this, oh, you take a series, I take a series. I think that's stupid. If you have 2 quarterbacks, you don't have one. And so it's doing a disservice to Mertz. It's doing a disservice to Lagway. I think we've seen Mertz ended up getting injured in this game. So it was Lagway down the stretch. I think it throws them both off the rhythm when you have one guy play and then he's feeling hot, he's feeling good, and then he sits down, and then you have the other guy play and he's feeling like, I just think it's stupid. I think it's a stupid thing that coaches do. I don't like it. I don't think it should be done unless you're blowing a team out, and you weren't. You were in a dogfight. And so I think if you're Napier, you're already checks written, bro. You're out. So why not just go for the win there? Instead, you take it to OT and you do what losers do. You find a way to lose. On the other side, if you're Tennessee, you won the game. You can pat yourself on the back. I don't know how good you're feeling about it as a volunteer fan moving forward, because like we might not be a good team right now. And that's a little bit scary. Like that is, you don't know what this team is and what this team is capable of, because at any point they could put up a massive amount of points, but also they could throw up duds and take it to overtime with Florida. That's got to scare you as a fan. That's got to make you concerned down the stretch as we get into these bigger and bigger games. And so I just don't know what to make of this team. They could be good, they could be dog shit. I think they're going to end up being somewhere in between, but it's for us to find out down the stretch. Four undefeated teams that are flying under the radar right now that nobody's kind of talking about: Pitt, BYU, Iowa State, and Liberty. I just kind of want to dig in a little bit, not get too into the weeds on these, but got the opportunity to watch Liberty play on Tuesday. They played the Pitbull University FIU. They did not play in the Dale Dome. They played at home. Uh, and this Liberty team, they struggled. FIU took them to overtime. And I don't know how good this I no, I think I know they're not that good. I don't think that this Liberty team it should be a playoff contender. I don't think they're anywhere near a playoff contender. I don't think they should be rewarded for going undefeated with this schedule. They're playing in Conference USA and they're not looking good. It's not like they're getting a dominant win over dominant teams. Like they're just beating average teams and they're not looking good doing it. I don't think their quarterback is all that great in Salter. I think that he is very mobile and he's a good athlete, but I don't know how good of a quarterback he actually is. This is a team that started off slow to begin the game and eventually they figured it out down the stretch, but they should have just blown this team out. I don't think they're a playoff contender. I don't think that they should be moving forward. I think that we should kind of stop that hype right now before it gets started. So let's pump the brakes on Liberty. Uh, BYU, Iowa State. Both of these teams look awesome, and I think both of them have a real viable chance of representing this Big 12 moving forward. I think that even if either one of them loses in the conference championship, they will I think they're going to be in the playoff if everything's kind of stays the same. If they keep winning, I think they will both be in the playoff and I think that's the only way the Big 12 gets multiple bids into this playoff is if it's BYU and Iowa State. They're both really good. Iowa State took on West Virginia. You've seen flashes as far as why West Virginia was considered a good team heading into this year. Ultimately, down the stretch, Iowa State was just better than them. BYU beats an up and down Arizona. We see what Arizona is at their best. We've seen them at their worst. This was kind of a mid showing for them, but BYU takes care of business. They continue to move forward. Good on the Mormons. And then Pitt. Pitt takes on Cal. This was a very close game. It came down to it was a 2-point game. And I think that Pitt is the most underrated, undefeated team moving forward. I think they are just so under the radar. I think that this is a team that no one's talking about in a conference that everyone thinks was wrapped up in week 2 with Clemson getting a loss, with Miami. They were looking dominant before, but it's like, hey, Pitt is here. And now you've got Pitt being undefeated. SMU looks good. Miami has struggled in the last 2 games that they've played. The bye week couldn't have came at a better time for them. Clemson now has some steam to them. I think the ACC is up in the air, and I don't know if the ACC is that good. I don't think that they should get multiple bids. I mean, they probably are, but we're starting to see down the stretch this upper tier of the ACC is rising to the top. And so I'm really looking forward to the rest of this year for them. Kansas State, Colorado. Kansas State is able to weather the storm and maintain the win. They get it over Colorado. Ultimately, down the stretch, this was a war of attrition. We've seen Avery Johnson go out. We've seen Horn for Colorado go out. Travis Hunter go out. It was injuries left and right. It was one of those weird games where it's like, who's going to be left over for us? And ultimately, Kansas State ends up pulling it out. Colorado tried to come back late and just wasn't able to do it. But this was a good back and forth battle. I really enjoyed it. I think that ultimately, I hate to fucking agree with Skip Bayless, but Skip Bayless said it best. He's like, hey, if Travis Hunter was available for this game the entire way through, it's a different story. And I think that's true. I think we've seen down the stretch when Horn and Hunter are out. It's tough, and I mean, they had young guys step up, and Wester and Shepard dropped dropped a long bomb, then comes back the next time and gets a touchdown. But that's just what you're going to get with young guys, and I think Shador showed that he is very capable, showed flashes again of what he can be moving forward. But he did show that he still has bad tendencies to hold on to the ball, to try to dance around, to be Caleb Williams light. And it just doesn't work. You end up taking sacks. Like, you got to get the ball out of your hands. I know what you're trying to do. You're trying to make plays, but ultimately, bud, you got to have that time clock in your head and make sure that you get the ball out on time. Avery Johnson, on the other hand, I think he had a solid game. I thought he showed his athleticism. I thought he showed great poise in the pocket when he had to. Ultimately, he did hurt himself. I don't know what the extent of his injury was when he made that long bomb pass, but I mean, they get away with the win. And I think that this was a scary one for them. This was one that they easily could have dropped, but I mean, they ran the ball like crazy as well. I think Giddings was awesome. Both running backs were great in this. And ultimately, the downfall of Colorado was not their offensive line. It was their poor defensive tackling. And also, one of the biggest proponents, one of the biggest guys was Shiloh Sanders, sadly. I mean, Shiloh Sanders looked like shit this entire game. I think you'll see on social media moving forward the mixtape of just missed tackles after missed tackle after missed tackle from Shiloh Sanders. And this game specifically, there's a whole like 30 to 40-second highlight reel of him just missing tackles or getting run over or getting his ankles broken. And so that's something that they're going to have to shore up. And even Dion said it after the game. Like, what did you think of Shiloh? And he was like, I thought it was terrible. I thought he had a horrible performance, but ultimately you're able to say it after the game, but you left him on the field that entire game. If you really felt like he was playing that bad, you got to pull him. You got to get him out of there and get someone else in that can actually make the tackles, Dion. And you didn't do that. And that ultimately cost you this game. Poor performance defensively from the Buffaloes. And this was a game that you got to be looking at the end of this year. They're going to look back and be like, we missed an opportunity. That's one that we should have had. That's on us. Okay, and that's it. Be sure to hit that like button. Be sure to subscribe, drop some comments below. And for sure you are going to want to be subscribed to this because we're going to be talking ball all this week. I know we're going to do our rankings video a little bit later on. I think tomorrow or Wednesday it's going to drop. So be on the lookout for that. And again, let us know what your thoughts are on all this crazy chaos that happened in college football this past week. Later.